Chad's been on the job over here. Why so far away?
Well, I can move down.
You got an extra monitor there.
I'm just used to the corner. I'm used to going to the corner.
Oh, boy. Here we go.
I guess we call this meeting to order. Want to do a roll call?
Acting City Administrator Lisa Westfall,
Here.
Alderman Ralph LeBlanc,
Here.
Alderman Chuck Rodriguez,
Here.
Kevin McConnell.
Here.
We have a quorum.
I guess the first thing on the agenda is the approval of the Human Resources Committee minutes for June 15th. I'll assume everybody's read those. Everything is perfect. Gina's really good about that kind of thing. So, do we have a motion to approve those?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Let's move on. Let's get this screen so I can see it. Let's talk about discussion of new hires, promotions, and reclassifications. Thank you for zooming that up. On the promotions and transfers, the top three that you see there were police officer trainees. These are folks that, for a recruiting process, what we do is we offer candidates an opportunity to go through the police academy on our dime. We pay for it. It's about, I looked at the numbers yesterday. I'm wanting to say it's about $8,600 per person. So it's not an insignificant amount. But we sign them to an agreement that says you'll stay employed with us for a minimum of 3 years. If you leave employment prior to that 3 years, then there's a prorated amount that they have to repay. So to that point, it's a good recruitment tool. It's been very effective for us to be able to find good candidates. The three individuals you see there, Matt Lynch, Caleb Deskins, and Jordan Wobster, those are individuals, Caleb and Jordan I don't know as well, but Matt Lynch, he was in our Parks Department for several years and did a really good job for us over there, was a supervisor over there, and looked at, there was an opportunity for him to make a transition into the law enforcement world, and he made that move. And he's just now getting back out on the street. All three of these guys are going through their training process internally. They are all sworn officers at this point, and doing well. We had some realignment in the Parks Department there, where some individuals left employment, and Cindy looked at her organization and said, how can I optimize the efficiency of how we get work done? And part of what she did in doing that is she identified two individuals that were outstanding performers for her, Kelly Ballou and Lucas Bring, and provided promotional opportunities for them. So these are folks that have been with us for a little bit of time here. Kelly longer than Lucas, but doing a good job for us there and making those changes for us to help optimize Cindy's operation. On the new hires, Colin, how do you pronounce that, Swire? Colin Swire, Andrew Asher, Jonathan Gregory, and Taylor Martin. Those are our new folks, and you can see those are individuals that they're replacing in the various departments in the police, utilities, and public works. Any questions about that? And part of the premise of why we bring this to you is we had done this. It was requested a couple of years ago that the aldermen didn't know who the new employees were. and they wanted to understand, well, who's an employee? Because we would have aldermen confronted by new employees that, hey, I work in the Parks Department, or I work in Public Works, and the alderman didn't realize it, and by doing it this way, you at least get an understanding of who's in which department and things like that. You understand who's coming on board and who's moving up in the food chain, so to speak. So, any questions about these? All right.
Jan, I had one question. On the, you mentioned the recruiting, thank you, tool of paying for them to go through the academy and that kind of thing. Have we been doing it long enough to where you can look back and say, yes, it's helped with recruiting? Is it pretty good retention? Have we had any issues with folks leaving and then, not getting any of that back? Or how has that worked overall in your opinion?
Well, we've had a pretty good record. We've lost a few along the way. Sometimes whenever you go through that process, you don't understand what the workload is going to be like, things like that. So the attrition has not been significant, but we've kept quite a few of them. The ones that we have lost, typically we get payback on it. There was one situation here where there was a confusion, to say the least, on how much was owed and things like that. We worked through that and sent a letter and got payment. Okay. So now, in a situation like we did have one where an individual went through the training program and then went to work for a municipality that had a much lighter workload and things like that, and left within a year or something like that. The other municipality wrote the check.
Okay.
So it was
And
fair.
definitely recruiting, it's got to help.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, because, I mean, in this situation, the number of applicants that we get in the police department is down significantly from where it was 5 years ago. And we're doing everything we can to try to get those folks in here. Right now they're going through the lateral transfer process. So we've established, for a number of years, we had this thought process that, no matter what, you start at the bottom and you work your way up. Well, if you've got 20 years experience and you're a police officer, what's the point of starting at the bottom? So we've developed a lateral transfer program so people can come in with experience and not have to start all over again.
Good deal.
Okay. Our next topic is discussion of our insurance, medical insurance options. As we took to the board a few weeks ago, we took a resolution asking Anthem for our renewal information by July 15th for 2022, and then by July 1st for every year thereafter, as long as they are our vendor with respect to medical insurance. The rationale behind that is they put us, by putting us at August 1st, it puts us kind of in a crunch period where we don't always have time to go out and do a qualified review of what options are out there if they come back with a big renewal increase. And so we want to escalate or accelerate that process so we get that information sooner. They've only had our information for 30-some years, so it's like they should be able to calculate it, even though they'll push back and say, "Oh no, we got to have this the full year." But we're just calling them on it and say we want this information sooner, because at some point, the way we do our enrollments and getting everything online, in order to meet a timeline that meets our needs, we need it sooner, because we get to a point where we've got a big crunch towards the end of the year getting all this information in, and it becomes unwieldy and unmanageable. So if you get a renewal notice at the 1st of August, we effectively got maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks to go out and shop the market to see what's available and what's out there. So we want additional time in the event the renewal comes back as, a fairly significant renewal. We've had in years past where they would come back with a 20%, 30% renewal increase, and then our broker was able to negotiate that down and get us to a point that was reasonable in our processes that we wanted to be able to afford. Because my primary goal in doing this is let's force the price down without negatively impacting employees, because what happens is the easiest way to affect prices is to affect whatever coverages you have, raise the deductible or, the co-pays and things like that, and put more of the burden on the employees. Now, I will say we've got a pretty rich insurance plan, but we're going to try to keep it that way as long as we can, because ultimately that's one of our better retention tools for employees, is to keep them here with good quality insurance. So to that extent, we've got a number of slides, if you will, variables that we can make adjustments, but the biggest one is let's see what the market has. And that's part of the reason why we want that additional time. Now, we got the renewal notice, and the renewal notice was a 9.9, or effectively a 10% increase. So to give you an idea of what that means to us, that's like a $350,000 increase, because our overall costs are somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.5 million. So when it comes to that, that's a significant increase. So those are the kinds of things that we want to be able to negotiate with. We want to be able to go out and shop and see what's available out there. So that being said, we've got a little bit of additional time here. I've got John Akers here. He's our broker, who is going to be our main negotiator with Anthem, and if we so direct him to go shop the market for us, he will be doing that for us as well. But part of the issue that, what I'd like John to do is explain, why our renewal was where it's at, what is there, what they've considered, what they haven't considered in our renewal process, and things like that, and what our options are going to be going forward. So, John, if you would.
So for the newer members of the committee, I'm John Akers with Alice Akers Arney. The renewal that we received, actually, when Anthem does what they call their formula, right? And they are consistent. They're consistently high, but they're consistent with how they put it together. The number was 28.2% that popped out that they would increase our premiums if we did not have a rate cap, which we negotiated last year as part of our process, which is the 9.9 that Mr. Fisher alluded to. We had a negative 1% renewal last year, to give perspective, so obviously we're coming off of a very good year. If you look at the big accounting firms that do studies on what costs are throughout the country, last year it was between 6 and 7% was the average increase in costs. This year they're projecting between 7 and 8%. That was before some of the things that popped in with Ukraine and all that, so by the time the dust settles, it may be a little higher than that as far as the overall increases. Anthem, typically, when we start fighting right out of the gate, right, on that 28.2%, we have not done that. That is just straight out of the chute from them. And the rationale is Anthem perceives and believes that their 9.9% cap is going to be the best offer that they can come to. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. We did have lunch the other day and go through some claims data. The information that they've included in their renewal includes some folks that are no longer with the city that are showing as active, that are high-cost claimants. And so as water goes under the bridge, we do have a little bit of time, perhaps, to see if the data gets a little bit better. And then we have maybe some negotiating power. But what I would suggest to this group is that, let's say we do get below 9.9%. Let's say we get it to 7. Let's say we get it to 6. I don't think we're going to ever get any better than that. Strategically, I don't know if that's a material enough impact to really change what your plans are going to be. And so that's why we're here early, is just to say, hey, this is kind of where we are. to let you guys start thinking about what you're going to recommend to the full board, which is how do we structure our benefits plan? To what Mr. Fisher said before, you have a very rich plan with a $1,000 deductible. That's much lower than most plans are. We used to have no deductible, and the employees still have the opportunity to buy up to that, but they do have to pay a little bit out of their pocket. Where your plan is more rich than most that I've seen is your dependent contribution is roughly 67% currently. And so that, even among municipalities, which tend to have richer benefits than just standard private businesses, that 67% dependent contribution is higher, and HR department's done some polling. We have a book of business of municipalities. That is more than most pay on the dependent side. Most do pay 100% for the employee, which you do. But from a dependent standpoint, just, and I don't know where the city's budget is. I don't know where, obviously that's for your pay grade, is to be looking at what can the city afford and what can you do. But those are the type of decisions that obviously we need to make, and so hopefully we're here in front of you 5 months and change ahead of when those would take effect to really try to ferret through what the best options are. We can, and just kind of as an order of operations, we did go to the market heavily last year and went through. Anthem was actually not the low bid. Cox Health Plans was, but it was very close. The employees, when we did a survey, or HR did a survey, really like the Anthem plan. And so the perception was that it was not worth making the change for a small difference in premium. United Healthcare took a strong run at us. They're the biggest insurer out there. Typically, I don't recommend going to the market every year. If you do, you get what's called market fatigue, where they're just looking at you like, oh yeah, these guys again. I don't think you guys have been bad about that over the years. So if you choose and want to go to the market, I don't really have a problem with that. I would just recommend that we don't use that. Bidding is a powerful and useful tool unless you overuse it. And so, there's a new board, there's new eyes. I think I can go to the marketplace and just say, hey, look, we've got other people wanting to take a fresh look at this. I don't really have a problem with that. But I don't want to give you sugar plums and dancing in your head either. If Anthem's coming out at 28% on their initial look, and then you've got a 9.9% cap, the other carriers are going to do math similarly to how Anthem does it. Again, if the data changes, we might have a better chance, but I don't want to give you the perception I'm going to be back up here in 30 days and we're going to be able to materially beat that. I don't perceive that to be the case. And I'm going to tell you what I think is the truth, even if it's not what you want to hear. So that's kind of where we are. And so, Jan, I don't know if I've hit everything that you wanted me to, but if anything, just an open discussion is, I think, what we're here for.
I think one thing that's important to remember is that we had a minus 1% last year, and we maintained our budget without that -1 in mind. So there should be that savings set back so that it should be able to help us afford more. That's one of those things that we wanted to make sure that we understood, that we're going to set that money aside in the event that we see something going on that could be a material difference in what we have from year to year. All that being said, there's multiple options out there that we probably would be worth a good discussion, and that would be, let's take a significant look at how we want to construct our insurance offering. If we want to, I've made no bones about it. At some point, I'd like to take this organization to being self-funded on the insurance. I think we've got some significant savings that we can capture that we're not getting right now. We got rebates and just different various things. And specifically, we would have greater control over our spend. But all that being said, there's some of the construct of what of our insurance makeup that we can start to take a look at. I'm not sure if now is the time to do it or talk about it or whatever, but, you know, we can transition to a partially self-funded, or we can come up with different variables and offerings for different plans and things like that to try to reduce some of our costs, because at the end of the day, you know, we need to make sure that we keep not only today in mind, but the future in mind, because I don't want to leave a legacy that, you know, somebody in my situation, in my position, had we made a significant change in 2011 or 2012 before I was ever here, we wouldn't be talking about what we're at today, because we've virtually doubled our expense since then. I don't want to be in 10 years having the city seeing, you know, a $7,000 insurance bill, that kind of thing. So those are the things that I hope John can walk us through and give us some ideas of what some options could be, that we can try to understand what direction we can go and try to help reduce some of those costs.
Jan, a quick question on, you were talking about set aside, and I know from being on the committee years ago, same kind of thing, set aside. Was that like a 3 or 4%, or was that a 9 or 10%, or what was that we set aside with our -1 last year? You know, what does that look like?
It should be somewhere in the neighborhood of, I believe, about $105,000.
Okay,
So
so a
from-
third, give or take,
Yeah,
of the projected increase?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the increase this year is 348,000.
somewhere in that neighborhood, yeah.
Where are we at as far as self-funding? What process are we in?
Well, at the end of the day, whenever you become self-funded, the idea behind that is you've got a bank of money set aside that if you get hit with some significant insurance claims in the first part of the year, you've got the ability to pay for those, because that's what typically can really wreck a plan is, you know, let's say, you know, a lot of times, like in January, if you get an insurance claim, it's typically going to be from December, which would be under the previous year's coverage. But if you get let's say you get a cancer policy or cancer issue in early January or late January or early February, something like that, it's $100,000. You have to have a bank of money to pay for that. And then that's the kind of thing that ultimately the premise of self-funding is that with the city and the employees making contributions over time, you're building up that bank to pay the bills with, and you're not simply just shipping it off to Anthem or whatever the carrier is to line their pockets. So at that point, the idea is, you know, we wanted to take that money and set that aside. This was going to be year one for setting that aside, for transitioning us into a point in the next year or 2 years to where we could start out a year and be able to take that kind of hit if we had a big expense in the early part of the year.
So we do have a plan for that right now?
We're working on it, yeah.
Okay, does that need board approval?
Thought I might add a little something to that. Just to give perspective on a self-funded solution, if you guys are at $3.5 million worth of premiums right now, you peel out the administrative costs, look at the claims. With a typical self-funded arrangement, the corridor, your maximum risk, because you don't just go out and just blind, right? In other words, you have to have insurance on top of your insurance. So there's what's called aggregate insurance, which means that you do have a risk corridor. It's usually 25%. And so in your case, that would be roughly $700,000 would be the, holy cow, we just had a horrible year. That's your worst case in a given year. Now, once it resets, right, you go to next year. If those same conditions are still in place, then you can have that again. Some of those costs can go up. But that gives you, I guess, maybe some perspective of the risk that's in place in any given year. If that helps.
Okay. Who manages a self-insured?
We would manage that.
Would that take additional employees, or would that be HR? Who would do that?
It would be a process that we would have to develop. We would, you know, there's, you know, I hate to say it, you'd have to have committees and things like that to be able to go through, you know, claims information and things like that. What things are going to be paid for, what aren't going to be paid for. But yeah, there would be an element of HR that would take on some of that. But you typically would hire a lot of that out, a third-party administrator to manage some of those things, to do the day-to-day billing, or not billing, but the claims information to the employees and things like that. We would just hire that out. That's part of that administrative piece that John was talking about, that, you know, we're paying a premium for with Anthem. We could probably get that significantly less than what we're paying right now. And like when he was talking about the aggregate and the different kinds of stop-loss coverage that we would have to employ. Right now, Anthem builds that in, and we're paying a premium, and we're paying, you know, and our stop-loss is, what, $125,000? Which is a significant, I mean, it's gone up over the years. I would typically think we could probably do a much better job going out by buying individual pieces and getting that ourselves, and probably paying equal or less than what we're paying now for significantly less stop-loss insurance.
So I have a question to go kind of backwards to the -1% that we had last year. So interesting, we were able to get there last year. So my question is, how do we get there this year, or why aren't we there, or what's causing this significant amount? Because if you can do it one year, to me, to go up to potentially 28% or wherever, and we're capping it at 10, that doesn't seem logical, and it just seems a significant increase. We've done it once.
Right? And you know, here's the thing. We got that through going out and competitive bidding and Anthem being scared to death that they were going to lose your business. I mean, that's just really down to it. Other carriers were coming in hard trying to get it because they realized, you know, that it was a good year to get it. If we go to bid again this year, can you expect that? I don't know. It just depends on, you know, what if Cox and United, and then, you know, to Mr. Fisher's point, there are, I don't know that you're ready yet to go self-funded, but there are certainly some options. I mean, Anthem can self-fund you for that matter. But you know, on the cutting edge, there's some advocacy solutions where you know, they're really going to employees and saying, hey, if you'll go to this center of excellence that's got one of the highest Medicare scores, we've negotiated a deal with them to do this at knee replacement at $30,000, where if you just go up to whatever your health system is, it's $80,000 or $85,000. There's international sourcing of prescription drugs is kind of out there on the edge. I mean, we had a seminar in our office that we had Mr. Fisher to here not too long ago. I mean, there are some solutions out there, but I still would suggest that the city needs to be in a very strong position as far as having reserves in place to be able to deploy those things. What I don't want is we self-fund you, and in the first year, you have a deficit. Now you guys are scrambling, trying to figure out where you're going to get the money from. I'd rather you have to have the money in place up front, but then again, that's your call, your decision, not mine.
Well, I still go back to this percentage of increase. I mean, you discuss market fatigue about going out. That struggle, I have a lot of struggle with market fatigue. We bid everything. I mean, that's our world. So if we have market fatigue, obviously didn't fatigue too bad last year to get us down to a -1%. I understand the philosophy, but it apparently worked last year.
It did, and I would suggest to you that we hadn't been out to the market every year, and the committee had not chosen to do that. If we do go to the market every year, I would say that the benefit decreases over time of bidding. But again, I want to be very clear, and I think I said this, I don't have a problem going back out to the market this year. You haven't fatigued it. You haven't been doing, you know, those things. But I just want to, last year you had an 88% loss ratio. This year you have a 97% loss ratio. So there is math involved, right? They're going to look and see what are the expected claims. And insurance companies, I mean, bottom line, they try not to price something to lose business, or excuse me, to lose money.
But that's not true yet, a true figure. That's not been trued up, right?
As far as
So there are errors in that percentage. It's my understanding.
there are, I mean, well, anyway, the way they calculated was 88% last year, 97% this year. And we can, go to different,
But potentially that's with employees not employed here, is what I heard. Is that where that impacts that?
there are some folks that are on your
Yeah.
large claims that are no longer here. Now, of course, the Anthem underwriter sitting over here would say, yeah, but we still wrote the checks. Now, but that being said, one of our jobs is to make sure that they're not underwriting in the rearview mirror, right? Saying that, hey, this person was here last year, because somebody coming in and looking at it new is going to throw that person out because they're no longer on the plan. And absolutely, we would definitely throw that out. And I think there may be some of that in place, but I don't have the data quite yet to be able to prove it.
I think one of my concerns, pardon me, is that there seems to be a connection between the reluctance to provide claims information and a rather significant increase. I was going to ask the same question that Lisa asked, and I get that. You can't go to the well too many times. You can't bid every year. But I think for me personally, and I'd love to hear Jan's opinion on this, I think it seems like there's that connection between the reluctance to give information until we don't have time to make a decision and this time a 9.9% increase. And I just wonder if, for that reason, in addition to what Lisa said, it makes sense perhaps to go bid again, not every year, not too many times, but maybe honestly with intention to say, let's bid and see if we can find something similar. We've been with Anthem, how many years?
33?
I mean, I don't know. You're in that world every day, John. I don't know how many have been with the same carrier for 33 years, but my guess is it ain't a lot.
Not very many.
Yeah. So for those reasons, I personally, as one member of this committee, would encourage that is significant to go from -1 to 9.9 with relatively similar claims data, particularly if there's some people in there that are no longer here. That would be my 2 cents, but.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And I'll just speak fairly bluntly about this with respect to Anthem is going to take the course of least resistance. They're looking for the easy way out. They aggregate the increase across all of the different plans that we have, 9.9. You cannot tell me that the HSA plan had that significant of an increase in claims versus the zero deductible versus the $1,000 deductible versus any of those. That's the part where they're just making it simple for themselves. And, and frankly, those are the kinds of things we just need to hold their feet to the fire. Last year, frankly, I had an unacceptable experience with Anthem with respect to releasing the data. Absolutely unacceptable. And those are the kinds of things I want to break that habit that they've got they take that course of least resistance. They're doing what's in it for their best interest and not ours. I want a partner for us, not somebody that's just looking to line their pockets at our expense. And that's my issue that I want to push and keep pushing until we get to a point where we've got trust in the game. That, when we get this, it's not like a used car salesman. I'm coming back with, let me go talk to my manager and see what better interest I can get out of this, or that kind of thing. Those are the kinds of things I want to really hold their feet to the fire, because this is business, and it's our job to get the best price for our employees and for our taxpayers.
So what's the next step here, Jan, as far as going out to the market?
Mr. Akers can take our information and go to the marketplace for us. He's got a plethora of different carriers that he could take it to and get bids and things like that. An ugly little secret when it comes to this kind of thing is a lot of times the carriers will say, well, what did Anthem quote you? And then they'll base their quote on what Anthem quoted you. That's the kind of thing where this whole business gets a little ugly in my mind. And that's part of the reason why I'd like to take us to that point to where we could get self-funded so that we don't have to mess with this business.
Who provides that information?
As
Anthem, or do they put the broker in that position to say, hey, can you give us that bid? Can we say, I'm sorry, I can't give that to you, or is that legal?
When I got into this business 30 years ago, I told them
We need to speak into the mic, please. We're streaming. Thank you.
when I first got in this business many years ago, We refused. We told them, no, we're not going to give that. We made sure that meetings like this were not public data or whatever, because the carriers are very good at looking. They know to look on your website. They know to look at your minutes. They know, I mean, they're trying to figure out what we're thinking before we go to them. So we've got to be a little careful. In today's marketplace, they will not quote. So United, Cox, name your carrier, and even the stop-loss carriers, because I'm going to get some self-funded options for you too, because it sounds like you guys want to go to market. They won't quote unless they know what Anthem, their renewal looks like. Now, one way to combat that, again, is Anthem's come out today with, hey, we want 9.9. If we let them come back as the same as the other carriers, then the way I handle that is if Anthem decides to modify their number, I don't tell the other carriers where Anthem is, because as the incumbent, I don't think that's fair to basically pull into Mr. Fisher's point. You might have a carrier look at it and go, oh, well, I was going to quote, but now they're there, so then they're just going to quote what they think it's going to take to get your business, right, as opposed to what's your best number. And so we try to keep that away from potential suitors.
I realized after I asked it, that was a stupid question, but to our two elected officials, that's why I believe this meeting should not be streamed, because you're absolutely right. When it comes to negotiating power, everybody in the world knows exactly what we're talking about. It's one thing to have a public meeting, but to stream it and to tell the competitors what we're paying is just blows my mind.
I would recommend that in future, we find a way to have this conversation where I don't like them knowing what I'm going to say when I get there, right? You know, that doesn't help me, that's for sure.
So Jan, if we would look at self-funded, I think there's two pictures almost, this and then self-funded, and then that step. So I know I've heard you've said that for several years now, but it seems to me there needs to be kind of a structure of how we would get there and options if we really want to start down that path. And that's a serious discussion and a serious consideration. And I guess we talk a lot at some point where it will be something that we really want to start that discussion and not just throw it on the table every year. So.
I agree. That, I think, John had mentioned perhaps taking a look at being partially self-funded, doing the kinds of things that we can do, what do you call it, the level funding with respect to, let's say, for example, we could set a very high deductible for our insurance, and then the city reimburses employees for whatever claims down to a certain deductible point, that kind of thing. There's multiple avenues that we can take. Ultimately, what it boils down to is, covering the costs that we need to cover, because obviously if someone has a serious ailment, a cancer or heart attack or something like that, we want to cover them. That's the whole idea behind this. We want them to have that assurance that, hey, I'm covered, my family's covered, everybody's safe and happy, and I can get well. That's the whole idea behind it. But, we want to do it in the most responsible way possible. Again, I'll leave it to John. He's the expert on this, to be able to come up with all the various options that we can look at. But I think we're going to get to that point where we got to think of something else. We got to think outside the box, and we can't just keep going this route year after year after year.
So moving on to, you discussed the impact that it's a benefit to our employees and a benefit to our hiring process.
Right.
So I think that's important, that as we look at the salary studies and positions, that this impact, what is that impact? Because I don't want to go backwards on a salary study and then go backwards with the benefits and lower the benefits. That's not fair either. And so I think it's important that they're done hand in hand, because I'm assuming with the salary study, you will tack on the benefits.
Absolutely.
To compare, and if we change those benefits, then that study is not going to be valuable as much with that change. So I just think that that's important. And being fair to the employees as to how that looks.
You're absolutely right. And that's one of those that we have a philosophical thing that we need to address at some point with respect to An employee that comes in with a family ultimately gets a better or greater benefit than an employee that comes in with no family. You know, what's the equity in that respect? Do we want to address that, or is that just the way it is kind of thing? How do we function in that kind of total compensation package with respect to a salary study and things like that?
Well, and I've said it before, I think it's important that you talk about cost of living. I mean, if we give cost of living increases to our employees, then what's our cost of living affect by the health insurance? Because that's one of the biggest impacts to an employee, to their salary, is that the health insurance, those benefits that they're going to now pay out of the pocket, and you go backwards. You can go backwards, so those are all important in a salary study, what that looks like.
Right. We've done a really good job over the years of, you know, curtailing unnecessary medical expenses. I mean, when I first came on board with the city, we would have, I don't remember the number, 50, 60 employees that would regularly go to the emergency room for head colds and ear infections and things like that, that would, you know, each visit to the emergency room typically costs somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,000, $2,500 or more, and versus going to your primary care physician. And that was part of the reason why with our wellness plan, we stuck in, you have to have a relationship with your primary care physician to try to knock down some of those costs. And we've done a really good job. And I think what we're seeing now is we see employees that are truly in need, and we're paying those costs for it and that thing. There's an argument that could be made that with a rich insurance plan, we are hiring sick people. You know, we could be looking at that, you know, someone has someone like a dependent who has a major ailment of some kind, and that would be an attractor for them to come to work, or their spouse or whatever, to come to work for the city. We don't have that ability to look into that and ask those questions in the interview and selection process. So that's kind of one of those things that, you know, we just have to keep in mind, that that's kind of the downside of what a rich medical insurance plan provides. So in that respect, you know, my recommendation to this committee would be that we have Mr. Akers, go back out to the market and come back with multiple scenarios with which we can affect changes that get us into that path of being, you know, perhaps getting us started out with partially self-funded, so that way in next year or year after, we can set aside enough money that we can then pull the trigger on that.
I agree with that.
Do we need a vote on that or anything, or can you?
I would appreciate a vote on that.
Okay. Lisa, what do we do?
You just want a motion to go out and have Mr. Akers go ahead and go to market and see what he can find for the various
And put together
insurance plans.
multiple options for us.
Including partially self-funding.
including starting into the self-funded. Yeah.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Am I doing this meeting? Sorry.
Okay,
Opposed? We're good.
all right,
Thank you, John. Thank you, Jan.
all right. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Okay.
No need to.
The next thing we want to get started on. Does anybody need to take a break?
Oh, no. Clay's in here.
Okay. Wanted to give you an update on a staffing study. We met with, Kimberly and I, we met with 5 departments, the larger departments that are currently experiencing the highest levels of turnover and things like that. I will say we also met with the fire department. The fire department has what we would refer to as low turnover. But we threw them in the mix because they're part of the public safety realm. And so we wanted to make sure that we looked at all the options that were out there. We met with them, and we went through, got in the weeds with a lot of different things with respect to metrics specific to what work needs to be done by the city that's not currently getting done, that just gets heaped on to next year and next year and next year. Keith Francis has excellent data that shows all the various tasks that he's leaving on the table with respect to getting streets taken care of and things like that. They're addressing those things that they can address in a timely fashion. And, you know, when you've got the quantity of roadways, and when it comes to utilities, the miles of pipeline and sewer line and things like that, and with the police department, fire department, the number of calls for service, all those different things, we delineated all of that out and said, okay, this is what our needs are. We've been shunting a lot of those, that growth, if you will, in fulfilling those needs over the years. We've just kind of curtailed it based on what I would consider our confusion with respect to not understanding the difference between FTE, which is a full-time equivalency, and headcount. Full-time equivalency means effectively, what's it take to do this job in 40 hours? And generally you want a 1-for-1. It takes one person 40 hours to do this job. I think what we're finding in many situations, it takes one person 50 hours to do this job, which then equates into a 1.25 FTE. And that's where we get that loss of the things getting done. Folks just don't have the capacity to do all of that work in a 40-hour work week. We have a plethora of overtime that we spend money on. Now, in the fire department, we've got built-in overtime into the schedule. They'll typically when we calculate overtime for the fire department, we look at it over a 3-year period because it kind of ebbs and wanes 1 year to the next. You'll have, but it generally ends up being about 156 hours of overtime each year, which is significant. And then in the police department, you've got significant overtime there. Now, granted, some of that overtime is going to be for security duty for entities that are paying extra to have a police officer come and patrol their particular shop or something like that, but it's still an overall expense that the city incurs. So what we did is we compiled all of this information from these 5 departments. Kimberly did a wonderful job in putting this all together. And we then lined it out with respect to how do we score this? How do we make it make sense? And so we put some factors together in there to come up with an overall score. And the premise is that the lower the score, the more urgent the need. So the urgency factor is, everything is on a basis of a 1, 2, or 3. A 1 means this is something I need in 2023, and a 2 would be something could we wait till 2024 or later, and a 3 would be, it'd be nice to have. And the same thing with complexity. That is, how complex is the job itself? Is it highly complex? Is it moderately complex? Or is it entry level? And then criticality. That is, how critical is this need? A 1 means I have no staff to do this function, or there's imminent loss of staff that is available now. A 2 means I've got long-term growth for this particular role in this area, or I see a change in functionality. And a 3 would mean, it's a pretty safe job. I've got low turnover, and no foreseeable changes in the future. And then the last factor is efficiencies. With a 1, if I employ this position, can I have a labor savings overall? Because at the end of the day, sometimes whenever you're not getting work done, you're still spending a potload of money on overtime and other expenses. And frankly, the more overtime you spend, there's a correlation between overtime and work comp claims as well. So those are the kinds of things we could see, ancillary things. Whenever people get tired or whatever, they're more susceptible to getting hurt. A 2 on that would be moderate labor savings, and then a 3 would be low labor savings. That would be something that, hey, this is just totally a new position. It's just going to cost us more money. So those are the things that we evaluated all these against, and all of the positions that we identified that with the different departments. Now, the one thing, it's a big caveat here, is we estimated the salaries based on our current structure. This is prior to any salary information that we may recommend to the board or anything like that. So just keep that in mind, that these are kind of scientific guesses at this point based on what we currently have. We looked at the current wage rate and extrapolated that out based on, okay, if I hire somebody 1 or 2 steps above the entry level. So if you would, go to the next slide.
Jan, before we go on, I have a question.
Sure.
Just for clarification. So we spoke about overtime, which would be your hourly.
Right.
So your FTE calculation, what about salary employees? Because how did you calculate their hours?
We did not calculate the hours for, based on the salaried employees, assuming, however, that, there's always going to be a little give and take and something like that. There's going to be times when a salaried employee is typically going to spend a few more hours each week. That's just, I took that as a given, and there's no additional cost to the city at that point.
But there is a healthy level of that, is where I was at, to make sure that if salary employees are not then shifted the burden of the load of those hours from the hourly rate because of that. And I work enough evenings and things, I see those employees here, and that's one of my concerns, is are we also compensating for those hours? And what's that expectation on a 40-hour week? What's the expectation of a salary employee? I mean, what's reasonable expectation?
A reasonable expectation would be normally a 40-hour week, and the anomaly would be to go beyond 40 hours, whatever that is. I will guarantee you, I don't know if she's here, Cindy Shook, she is not a department head who sits back and puts her feet up on the desk and says, here, go do this, go do that. I'm not saying we don't have, but, we've had that in the past where leaders would sit back and just direct people to go do things. But my point with something like that, she's out there busting it a lot. Out there, how many department heads would actually go out and paint pools, that kind of thing, and do that level of getting down in the ditches and in the weeds with people. To your point, it's, we try to deal with that as best we can, but there's a certain level of ebb and tide with respect to when work is heavy and when it's light, and that's going to be difficult to ascertain for all salaried employees.
But I think where we're at, as far as when we're talking FTEs, to your point, FTE, ebb and tide's appreciated, but when it's ebb and when there's not a lot of tide, I think we have to look at that.
Yeah.
And, when it's up and down and it's a give and take, but I think as with the overtime hourly employees, the salary employees are getting labored a lot of hours also. And then we add employees and look at these positions, and I think it's important that we know that the positions we're looking at are hourly or salary, because that's a different shift in where you put your load of what the employees do. I just think it's important that we don't just look at the hourly employees,
absolutely.
because it's a document, hourly employees are documented time. You have a documented overtime amount.
Right.
Salary is not, but fairly, if people are working a lot of overtime,
The thing about it is, an hourly employee is paid specifically for their time. A salaried employee is paid for the product of their work. And, it's going to be difficult to ascertain across the board and even measure what does it take for an HR director to do his job versus what does it take for a parks director to do her job. I would guess to a certain degree, the one thing that we as an organization have done for multiple years is we've learned how to live in what I would refer to as starvation mode. And in that respect, we're more likely to hire those in the non-exempt positions so that we can free up a little more time for those in the exempt positions. Because at the end of the day, like with Cindy, for example, she's out painting pools because she doesn't have enough non-exempt help to paint those pools. It's just that simple. Okay. When we look at the positions that we had looked at with respect to the fire department, we've got Station 4 that is going to be coming online at some point. And so the point whenever we went through all of these with the fire department, they wanted to hire the firefighters ahead of the actual opening of the station. Part of that makes good sense to me, that you have them prepared and ready to go. But the reality is, when is Station 4 going to be open? So there's a market timing for all of that we need to take into consideration. And that's how they scored the way they did. When it comes to, like the captain and the engineer position, those are all promotions. So those are not new hires that we have to go out and typically train. So that's the kind of thing that we've got a little more time for those kinds of positions. And the score reflects itself based on the overall scheme that we've got. And then they also ask for a training officer and then someone to help with emergency management. Those scored a little lower in the overall scheme of things. Those are more in the nice to have category. But we'll see how that goes whenever we meet with all the directors. The other part to this that we want to make sure that you see is the turnover rate. When you look at the subsequent years from 19 through 21, that's relatively low. It's about half of what the overall city experiences when it comes to turnover. Want to go to the next one? Police Department. Police Department, their request for additional dispatchers. This is one where I wish Chief was here. I would probably say, from my perspective, I don't know that this is enough, frankly. You've got dispatchers, and then you've got a sergeant. In some situations, we have sergeants that are spread so thin that if one of them is off sick or something like that, somebody has to step up to be an acting sergeant for a while. But then we have the lead dispatcher positions. Those are ones that I think are going to be beneficial to us as an organization, but we have one supervisor to spread both across both shifts. And the span of control for this one supervisor, in my opinion, is too great. I would like to see another supervisor in that part. They need a police services assistant. They're asking for one of those so that they can then offload some of the mundane tasks that sworn officers are required to do, filing reports and things like that. So if they can get some help with that, that would free up a lot of time. And then they're asking for an additional lieutenant position for a leadership role to be able to expand that out. If you would scroll on down. Parks and Rec, where their request is they need a couple of maintenance specialists and a supervisor and an office assistant. They've just got, in their world, they've spent years working with seasonal labor. The seasonal labor market has virtually dried up for us. They can't get anybody. So what they've done, and Cindy is expert at consolidating labor or tasks, if you will, to concentrate different areas so that we can hire a full-time person to replace multiple seasonal labor positions. And this is what that effectively represents. And you look at that turnover rate that she experienced in 2021 was significant. Over 15% of her staff swapped out. It's the workload where, it's just a heavy workload.
If I could add, that supervisor position kind of addresses some of what Lisa was talking about.
Right.
Cindy currently works probably 80 hours a week or more almost every week. And then her other supervisors that are exempt are also working 50 to 60 or more every week. If they work 50, that's probably a light week for them. So if we can, the supervisor for that is basically, we don't want to burn out the people we have. We're probably at risk of doing that already with the amount of hours they're working. And also for that office assistant, they're in charge of a lot of maintenance, and they don't have any office person to do that. So that's some of those overtimes for those maintenance supervisors are doing all of the office work as well. They don't have an office person there.
And just to be clear, I think we talk a lot about directors, but I am concerned about the salary employee. I don't want that, and I think it's happened. We compressed. We took from that bottom group of people that were hard to hire, the hourly, and I think they've shifted that load up to some of those salary employees just to maintain functionality. And I would assume supervisor at Parks is a salary position, am I right? And the other two are not. And I think that doesn't show that when you see the salary person at their salary, what they're making, take that by how many hours, it's not a divided by 40-hour position. I think that's a deception. They're maybe working a constant 60 hours a week because they're under that salary. That's that FTE that I don't want to lose employees that the salary people are now owning because probably a lot of lack of ability to hire and work needs to be done.
Yeah.
So overtime is not shown in those salary positions, and I just don't want to lose that aspect.
Okay.
It's very serendipitous you mentioned that. I know I'm not on this committee, but I was here at, 7 o'clock last night working, taking care of some things. And the Parks Department supervisor, Mr. Cartwright, was here at 7 o'clock. He'd been here since 6 a.m. And I said, Jim, what are you doing? And he's cleaning toilets. He is cleaning City Hall. He is, and he was going to be here another hour or two after I left. He phenomenal employee. So my point to that is, yes, this is really happening. I've seen it with my own two eyes. Last night, I sat and talked with him for 5 or 10 minutes about it. And phenomenal employees, but sometimes these salary employees are just, that compression's real, and it's happening. Just to share a story with you, it's kind of serendipitous that this came up literally hours later, but
Well,
I had no idea.
to kind of piggyback on that, I was driving home last night at about 10:15, and there was someone at Alexander Park doing something at 10:15 last night, and it was probably this gentleman.
Very likely.
Yeah.
There's no overtime.
Yeah, we have a tendency to lump all of that extra responsibility onto the onto the exempt employees. The other thing that you have to also look at and say, okay, what is my comparative advantage in my role? You know, if I am a salaried employee that makes $50,000 a year, does it make sense for me to be out front answering the phone that a non-exempt person can do at a much lower rate of pay? Those are the things. What's your comparative advantage? Your comparative advantage, if you're a salaried employee, is otherwise making money for the organization in different areas and saving money and doing different things like that. Sometimes you just have to do the mundane tasks, but whenever you're in a situation where it's perpetual, to your point, day after day after day, you're covering bases for somebody else. Okay.
Just a real quick, curious question on that one, on that side, this gentleman that you're talking about last night, which position is that?
He is a supervisor, what's his title?
He's a maintenance superintendent, but the position that would help the most for him in particular would be that office assistant 3, because not only is he doing all of that scrubbing of toilets and all of those things, but he has to track all of the paperwork for his department too.
So an office assistant 3 is supposed to clean toilets?
No.
Paperwork.
She would be able to do a lot of the paperwork,
Okay.
and then he can focus on other things. The supervisor in the parks, that's gonna offload the recreation side
Gotcha, okay.
of the
Perfect.
parks department.
Okay, I just want to make sure it was reflective in this, or we're just going
And
to
then
continue.
also those maintenance specialists will also offload that for that gentleman, so he can have them be doing those things
Okay.
instead of him working all those hours.
Thank you.
Okay, if you go to the next slide. Public Works, again, the reason the maintenance worker 2 in Public Works, the reason that position comes to a higher level, those are going to be a little harder to find simply because of the complexity of the job. Somebody that can operate heavy equipment and things like that, that just becomes more of a challenge. But all of those positions are going to be really necessary for the functionality of that particular department. Again, I go back to the premise that there's a lot of functionality that's being left on the table simply because they just don't have the staff to do it. And Keith has the metric for that. That's the kind of thing that whenever we complete all of the study, we'll have all of that information available. And again, the one thing I don't want to miss out on is look at that turnover rate. That's ugly.
And I can tell you 2022 is not looking good for that department. And trying to fill the positions is awful. We have probably at least 60 to 75% of the people we set up for an interview don't even show up or call.
And a big, you know, I would challenge that this is an area, you know, you don't think about market competition, but I think we're getting hit hard with market competition because, you know, a lot of folks look at the entry-level pay and they look at what we pay you know, for a maintenance worker 2, somebody that would operate heavy equipment, we pay about $37,000 a year to start. And that's just a ballpark estimate that I plugged in. In the market, you're probably realistically making $20, $25, $27 an hour now, closer to $45,000 or $50,000 a year. And that puts us at a comparative disadvantage. And that's part of the rationale, in my understanding, of why our turnover is as big as it is there. And then utilities. Utilities has a significant turnover rate as well. You know, they're needing, they need a bunch of folks. They need 5 of the utility workers. These are just folks that do the maintenance type work. They need an equipment operator and plant operators. They're needing a couple of those. You know, our plants operate on a 24-hour shift, and You know, right now, we're spending a significant amount of money on overtime and things like that, where we have a number of folks that, you know, that's the downside with respect to what we have from a benefit perspective. Got a question?
I was just doing the math. That's 32,000 for utility work. I didn't realize.
Yeah.
That seems really low.
Same equipment operator.
What's that?
Exact same equipment operator.
Yeah. So, again, these numbers are based on our current scales, based on averages of what we look at currently, and they are low. They are low. We need to make some changes to this. Okay, next one. Okay, so what we did here is we compiled this all into all the different ones, and we laid it out with respect to the overall need and kind of the area that we're going to look at for each, for all the departments together, the dispatcher, the park supervisor, maintenance worker two, things like that. The firefighter, fire captain, and the fire engineer. Again, there's a little caveat with respect to that's going to be dependent upon Station 4 opening. There's going to be, you know, a lead time for that. But these are all positions that we've highlighted here that we're going to stress, I think, to a certain degree that we need to focus on heavily whenever we're doing our budgeting for 2023. And I have to point out a mistake. If you would scroll up just a little bit. Okay. There is, on the total numbers of sevens, there's only 10, and there is 1 8. So that was a mistake, and I'm not sure how I let that slip by. But just so you know, we're looking at a total of about 22 positions that we need to be cognizant of adding. But, again, you look at that total estimated number of, that's over $1 million in spend. That's a lot of money. So those are the things that we have to balance. What can we afford? What can we phase in, and those kinds of things. We're going to have to take a hard look at all of that. What we've pointed out right here is what we're seeing for 5 departments is an initial need. And we've prioritized those and laid it out there. How do we inculcate that into our budget and into our organization? Those are some additional steps that we need to take. Anyhow, that's an update on what we've got. Any questions, comments, rumors? Okay.
Jan, will you be presenting this to the board, or what would the next step be that you, the one concern I see are the urgency.
Yeah, I will go through this with the directors first.
Okay.
And, because this is the first glimpse anybody's had. And there will likely be some tweaking to some of this. We will update some of the numbers with respect to salaries and things like that. And to your point, I think it's very valid. I want to take a hard look at how do we come up with a metric that fairly evaluates the exempt versus the non-exempt.
Would this be a study session?
I think it might be a good spot for it, just to at least
all
have a
the directors
conversation
present?
about it. Because there is a lot of detail. Okay. I think that's it for this particular topic. I have, no other real reports to speak of, unless this committee has anything wants to ask or direct. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor?